Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Civil War Reports. I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak, and today I'm very proud to bring this episode to you. If you've been following this channel, you know that I've done a series of Southern history, Confederate history under attack. Well, today I'm going to be starting a new series because it appears there's a new day, a new dawn has arisen. And today's episode is the first of what I hope will be many, many episodes of the return of Southern history. And it all begins with a gentleman, a Confederate general, a transplanted Northerner, who is really the start of the rise or the return of Southern history. And the gentleman served as a Confederate general from the state of Arkansas. I'm currently back on the Gettysburg battlefield, although this gentleman did not fight here, but he was from the great state of Arkansas, the only state of the Confederacy that I have yet to step foot in. And he, was in the papers a few years ago during the height of the movement to dismantle and erase Southern history. This general I'm speaking about is the only Confederate general to have an outdoor monument in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. But a few years ago, that statue was pulled down by a bunch of rioters in the summer of 2020. But by order of President Donald Trump, his statue is set to return to Washington, D.C. So folks, let's hop in the car, let's take a ride down the road, let's go to Washington, D.C. and talk more about this Confederate general from the great state of Arkansas. Well, hello folks, we are now in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and I am in Judiciary Square, and that's where we're going to pick up for this episode. But before I get into it, I just want to tell you, I've mentioned in previous episodes that I, as a young child, was very much into the American Revolution, and on vacation almost every year my parents picked a destination down south. We went to the Yorktown battlefield in Virginia, Thomas Jefferson's home in Virginia. We went to Disney World a number of times in Florida, trip to Kentucky, and I remember traveling down south in Virginia and through the Carolinas, through Georgia on our way to Florida. I would see these signs like vanity license plates that say the South will rise again, and as an 8-year-old I didn't really understand that until I got more and more into the Civil War and realized what that saying meant. And well, for the last couple of years Southern history was really under attack, but a new day has dawned and things are changing. And we're going to start off right here in Judiciary Park, because this is in many ways where Southern, at least Civil War history, is starting to rise again. And it was here in Judiciary Park back in the summer of 2020, shortly after the George Floyd incident, and racial tensions were at a very high level. I don't want to say an all-time high, but they were up there. And in this square, park, whatever you want to call it, it's a nice little beautiful setting. There was a statue to a Confederate general. It was the only outdoor statue to a Confederate general here in the nation's capital. His name was Albert Pike. Who was he? Well, that name doesn't rank up there with a Stonewall Jackson or a Braxton Bragg or a Robert E. Lee, but he was nevertheless a Confederate general. So what can we say about him? So who was Albert Pike? You know, when you think of the list of Confederate generals, that name generally doesn't rise to the top. He was a Confederate general. And he was born on December 29th, 1809, in, of all places, Boston, Massachusetts. Yeah. He was not a Southerner by birth. He was a New England Yankee by birth. And interesting thing about him, he could trace his lineage in America back almost 200 years from the time of his birth. His family first arrived in New England in 1635. So in many ways, he was as true blue American as you could get at the time of the start of the Civil War. I mean, his family had roots in America by the time the Civil War started for over 200 years. Okay, he was well educated, attended Harvard, and in the late 1820s, he was a teacher for a while, and in 1831, he decides to move west. And first he goes to Tennessee, then to Missouri, then to Texas, and out to New Mexico for a little while, and then he finally settles down in the state of Arkansas. That's why we started this episode at the Arkansas Memorial up in Gettysburg Battlefield. Now, in a lot of ways, he wasn't your typical Southerner, because again, he's a transplanted Northerner. And when he arrives in Arkansas, he works for a newspaper, and he is a member of the Whig Party. Now, who are the Whigs? Well, the Democratic Party really was the party of the South at that time. The Whig Party wasn't around very long, and it would morph into, join with other political parties and form the Republican Party. The Republican Party is the party of Lincoln. At the time of the Civil War and the aftermath, the Reconstruction era, the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, the party of abolitionists. So he's a member of the Whig Party, which, like I said, would eventually morph into the Republican Party. Now, Pike would eventually become a lawyer in Arkansas, and he would work for the Arkansas Supreme Court. And he also, as a lawyer, defended a lot of Native Americans. Okay, he defended at least 2 Native American tribes when he was a lawyer out there against a U.S. incursion into what was then deemed their land. Yes, when he moves to Arkansas, he would become a slave owner. Yes, it is believed, estimated, whatever word you want to use, that Pike owned about 6 slaves during his lifetime. Not a very large amount, but still, nevertheless, 6 slaves. And while he did nothing legally wrong by owning the slaves, we could make an argument that what he did was morally wrong by owning slaves. When the U.S. became involved with the war in Mexico in the 1840s, Pike was living in Arkansas, and he did volunteer his services for the Arkansas State Militia to serve that state and the United States during the Mexican War. So as an attorney, as I mentioned, Pike did represent Native American nations against the United States of America. And sadly, I guess that was not remembered when it came time to topple his statue here in Judiciary Square. I guess Native American lives don't matter. But because he worked tirelessly for the benefit of Native Americans when the Civil War came, He was commissioned a general on November 22nd, 1861, and he was placed basically in charge of trying to get Native Americans to volunteer troops for the Confederate cause. What a lot of people don't seem to realize when studying the American Civil War, because not much is written about this, the war out west was drastically different than the war in the east. And believe it or not, yes, Native American, American Indian, whatever term you want to use, troops did serve during the Civil War, and Pike was placed in charge of Indian troops in the state of Arkansas. And there were incidences out west of the Native Americans scalping Union soldiers, and this caused Pike a lot of pain and regret. That was definitely not considered civilized warfare, and Pike regretted those actions. Now, Pike did not serve for the duration of the war. Not even close. Again, he was a general. He was stationed out in Arkansas, placed in charge of Indian troops, and when charges were made against him, claiming that he was not turning over to the Confederate war effort, that he was not turning over Indian funds and weapons to the Confederate government, Pike resigned his commission. He, was, I guess, an honest man for the most part, and when these charges were brought against him, things were different back then, and gentlemen did not like to have their character come under attack. So he resigns his commission. He would be charged, and he would be jailed briefly on these charges, which would eventually be dropped. He resigned his commission effective November 11th, 1862. So just under a year, 11 days shy of a year, he was a Confederate general. After the war was over, he would ask President Johnson for a full pardon, which he would receive, and he would die on April 2nd, 1891. As for the statue that was here in Judiciary Park, that was torn down on June 19th, 2020. Again, really at the height of the racial tensions that were taking place in America at that time. Now, the South will rise again. At least Southern Confederate history will rise again. By order of President Donald Trump, that statue that was here in Judiciary Square is slated to be returned. It's going to be put back on its pedestal, and that's supposed to happen sometime this year, I'm told. And as far as this channel is concerned, that's a good thing, because it's a piece of American history. Pike is not your average Confederate general. I mean, he wasn't born in the South. He did own slaves, only a handful of them. Again, at the time, doing nothing legally wrong. Slavery, unfortunately, still exists around the world. Thankfully, not in the United States of America, but it still exists around the world, and that really needs to be brought to an end. Okay, well, I got more good news about Southern Civil War history. We're going to pack up and go across the Potomac River to Arlington National Cemetery. All right, folks, my intention was to take you back to section 16 of Arlington National Cemetery. However, our federal government had other plans. First, they did not want me to take the tripod in. I was told to take it back to my car. I could put the camera on the stick and do one of those things I hate doing, where I hold the camera out like that with one hand. And then they also told me I couldn't bring the microphone in. And little did they know the camera actually has a built-in microphone. This, of course, is better. But if I'm holding the camera on a stick, the microphone on the camera would have been more than sufficient. And I just said, okay, there's too many hoops to jump through. Last time I was here, had no problem. Walked in with the tripod, walked in with the microphone, went to section 16 and filmed. All right, be that as it may, this is our federal government at work for us. Maybe the Confederacy was on to something. Oh, also, by the way, just a report. I don't know if the National Guard is still patrolling Washington, D.C., but when I was in the city a few moments ago, I did not see a single National Guard troop. I didn't see a single Humvee or a tank or helicopters flying overhead, as some media outlets reported. But I did see a lot of police presence, especially around a lot of the federal buildings. Streets were blocked off. They were even using trucks that they used to plow the streets with. The snow plows are still on the front of them. So that, I don't know what's going on there, why they had certain streets completely blocked off, but they did. All right, anyway, if you want to know more about Section 16, Arlington National Cemetery, I have a whole episode on that. And I talk about the monument that was in the center. What was Section 16, or what is Section 16, just to fill you in if you're new to the channel. Arlington National Cemetery was created on basically farmland that was owned by Robert E. Lee, right across the Potomac River. In fact, from his mansion up on the hill, you can look down upon Washington, D.C. And as the Civil War went on, his land was confiscated by the federal government, and it was decided to start burying Union soldiers on his property, assuming Lee was going to return after the war was over and he would see all these Union grave sites. From what I understand, Lee never returned to Arlington after the war was over. The government confiscated it and claimed it as their own. Well, one section of Arlington was dedicated just to the Confederate soldiers. There's about 400 or so former Confederate soldiers buried, and it's called Section 16. Now, right around the time of, I guess it was around the start of World War I in Europe, a monument was placed in the center of Section 16. Go back to my previous episode on that, you can see what the monument looked like. Well, during the previous presidential administration, under the Joe Biden administration, that big, huge monument was removed. And luckily it wasn't destroyed, wasn't melted down. But I read in the paper recently, again, thank you, Deb at my former job, for filling me in on all of this. Both the Pike Monument and Arlington, that monument is slated to be returned to Arlington National Cemetery in the year 2027. Another win for Confederate history, another win for American history. So thank the powers that be that have decided to return that monument to its rightful place. And as I mentioned in that previous episode, that monument was, the legwork to get it there was done by the Daughters of the Confederacy. And, you know, at a time recently in American history, any mention of the Daughters of the Confederacy, boy, that was taboo. So that monument is slated to be returned. Now, how much is it going to cost the American people? Unfortunately, I have not been able to get an exact dollar figure. From what I was told, it was over $10 million to remove that monument in the first place. So just for the people with the woke mindset who are suffering from that terrible virus, think about all the good that could have been done with that money. How many hungry mouths could we have fed? How many young children of low-income families could have received some good medical care for that kind of money? But no, we have to spend it on removing a statue that is hidden in the back corner of Arlington National Cemetery. If you don't want to see the statue, don't go to section 16. Come to Arlington, visit JFK's grave. You can, not far from him is the grave of Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and go visit the Tomb of the Unknown, watch the changing of the guard, and then leave. Don't continue walking towards section 16. Well, hopefully we've reached a turning point. Hopefully things are going to change. And hopefully the mindset that existed in this country a few years ago will go away, and that we can preserve American history for what it's worth. All right, I'm sorry I couldn't take you into Arlington. There was just too many hoops to jump through, and it's a Sunday morning, and well, hate to say it, but I got a honey-do list at home that's waiting for me, so got to get to that. All right, folks, thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this episode. It was my pleasure to bring it to you. For Civil War Reports, I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. Until next time, please keep the history alive. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button. Give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends. Let them know about this channel and ask them to subscribe as well. If you like, you may leave a question or a comment below, and perhaps I will answer your question in a future episode of Civil War Reports. Until next time, please keep the history alive.